Hi, I'm Chris and this is Realme's 8 Pro. So we have an interesting release from them. They're heavily focusing on the camera department, and that is one of very few changes to this particular model because it is really the Realme 7 Pro. So we have a 108 megapixel HM2 sensor from Samsung, and it does take a better photo than the Realme 7 Pro, the main camera. 8 megapixel ultra wide, the 16 megapixel on the front. We have the same exact specs, so it's an AMOLED Full HD Plus 6.4 inches, the Snapdragon 720, and a 4,500 milliamp hour battery with fast 50-watt charging. And then the design of it, a slight tweak here. The camera modules look a little different, and then we have this questionable large slogan here on the back, very large in fact, that I don't know really why they've done this. And in the box you will find a quick guide, important information guide. Our charger, which is 65 watts, will charge this phone in around 40 minutes, which is very quick for 4,500 milliamp hours. Our charging cable, so that's type A to type C. TPU case is also included, which is a smoky gray color. And the build of the Realme 8 Pro here. So the first thing you notice is that standout slogan, and that was my first question to Realme. Are all models going to have this Dare to Leap slogan, which is, I think, a little too large, and it just stands out a little bit too much to me. And personally, I wish it didn't have this. I think it would have looked a lot better with just the Realme branding there. Why do we need to have this? And their response was yes, that all of these models, so the 8 Pro and even this one, which is the Realme 8, will have this, which even stands out a little bit more, as you can see. So this is a plastic backing with a texture to it, which is a matte texture, so it doesn't pick up fingerprints that much at all. And it's good, but you can see it reflects a lot, all this part. Now, the edges on this are fine. The frame around the outside, that is all made out of plastic there as well. So it's a plastic build, which makes it, yes, light. So it's a 176 grams. And the thickness is 81 millimeters. Our screen, this does have a tap to wake or wake up, lift to wake feature, in-screen fingerprint reader. Now this one I find to work sometimes a little slow. Now you can see then that that didn't work perfectly, and I do find this that I often have to repeat it. And I am on the latest firmware, so there we go. And I tried to add the same finger twice and it will not let me because it detects it. Detected my thumb and said, hey, that's an identical fingerprint, so you can't add it again, which is a shame. So I can't really improve upon that unlocking speed. Face unlocking, that tends to work quite well. I've got my camera and tripod in the way, and once it does detect your face, you can swipe up to unlock or just go directly in. So bottom bezels, they're not too bad as you can see. And we have a camera up the front here. This one is 16 megapixels like we have seen with some of their previous phones, but an AMOLED screen with this. So it is quite slim, and the SIM tray here, just to quickly show you that this does take 2 nano SIMs or micro SD card, which is good. And the buttons, they are on the right hand side, made out of plastic, good location to them, so I can easily get access to that. It's right where my thumb would normally be, and then a volume up and down buttons there, also made out of plastic. You can see that the cameras, they do protrude a little here. And this is where we do have some big changes. So they've got now the Samsung 108 megapixel HM2 sensor. Now this particular sensor has an f1.88 aperture, a 6-element, so 6p lens, and then we've got an 8 megapixel ultra wide with an f2.2 aperture, 2 megapixel macro, and a 2 megapixel black and white camera there too. So I really wish they didn't, and I've said this with other brands as well, that they did not give us these 2 megapixel cameras because, well, they're not really that useful. I would prefer an ultra wide camera that had a higher megapixel count, and if it had autofocus, it can double as a macro camera. We've seen this with other brands. Down the bottom there is a single loudspeaker with this, so we don't have a secondary loudspeaker, which is a shame. I feel they could have added this to this phone. And then our Type-C port, so this doesn't support video out, USB 2 speeds, microphone, and then a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack, which does sound reasonably good. The quality out of this one, I find that it's fine. It's good, and the loudness is also good. And then a secondary mic here at the top used in video and for noise cancellation. So we have a 6.4-inch Full HD Plus AMOLED screen in this with a very good peak brightness of, well, they claim 1000 nits, and I'm getting around 890 nits my measurements. It is a very good screen. However, there's one thing that I feel they should have done, and that is gone with a high refresh rate. So this is the standard 60 hertz, and I feel that 90 would have been good, or 120 even better, because I know that their competitors out there are now releasing phones with 120 hertz screens, and I feel that that's a missed opportunity. So the blacks, they do look deep, and I don't know why that's stayed in green colors, because that's obviously blacks right there, and that is our white. So very good. Now we're not going to see around the cutout here for the front-facing 16 megapixel camera any bleeding or dimmer pixels or anything like that, because it is an AMOLED, so that is good to see. There is an ambient light sensor, of course, like all phones. Eye comfort mode, we have our night modes. You can get this to auto switch. You can schedule that. And there are various other options too with our color temperature. So if you think that it's a little bit too cool, the white, you're able to adjust this to, say, a warmer white. And the slider, you can tweak that to your own preference there. The typical font display size settings, that's there as well. There is no vivid color mode, and there is no DC dimming option with this. And as mentioned, I feel that they should have gone with at least a 90 hertz panel. That faster refresh rate would make this phone feel a little smoother. And onto the ROM performance now. So it has Realme UI 2. There was a firmware update that just came through today. So I have had the phone for now about a week, and I was waiting for that update that we got with these review units that came through, and just added a few features, fixed a couple of bugs and things that I was experiencing with this. So it's looking like it's now ready for release, of course. So the performance of this ROM, how is it? Now the 60 hertz is making it feel, yes, a little bit more slow compared to the 120 hertz phones that I've been using a lot now. And in fact, my main phone is 120 hertz as well. So I'm noticing that. But for the 60 hertz and being the Snapdragon 720 that it has in this, it is fluid, it is fast. Is it completely flawless and perfect? It isn't. Like if you start to multitask quite heavily, you will notice that sometimes it will show a tiny little bit of frame dips in the UI that I'm experiencing, which is to be expected with this chipset. It's not completely high-end. Now, I have 8 gigabytes of RAM with this particular model that was sent out to me, and the 128 gigabytes of storage with this. So when you are going through and multitasking, that seems to be quite quick and not too bad. It's just if you have a game in the background, you may notice then that when you go to your apps, you swipe up, it just might not be quite as fluid as it could be. And this was the update that I got. This one added the Starry mode, and there are a few other things. So I think most retail versions should be shipping with this, but they might not. So of course you just connect up to your internet, you download that update. So the charge time, very, very quick on this. I mentioned it's a 65 watt charger, but it only charges at 50 watts. But 50 watts is still excellent, still very fast. So to go from 11% to 100 took 39 minutes. With this 4,500 milliamp hour battery. That is excellent, well under an hour, so really quick, that's great. Good battery life, thanks to the fact that it's an AMOLED screen, and also because it's just 60 hertz we have now, and that aids in the battery life, and that is why we get a runtime here with my fixed looping benchmark with PC Mark. I calibrate the displays all to 200 nits, and it ran for almost 15 hours here, so that is very good. Real world use, you were looking around about 10 to 11 hours of on-screen time. Now the GPS, Qualcomm chips here have that limitation that the accuracy at the moment will not be any better than 3 meters. Has a hardware compass, of course, and the average signal strength is good. So good GPS on this particular model. Now the wireless tends to cap out at 200 megabits per second. I've seen this before on other phones with the Snapdragon 720. So that is normal. And thanks to the plastic frame around this and the plastic backing on it, signal strength is very good, and the performance at my lowest spot 2 still achieved well over 100 megabits per second, which is great to see. So camera 2 API support is level 3. That means that yes, you can go out there and download a Gcam port and test it out with this 108 megapixel Samsung HM2 sensor. We have a Widevine level 1 cert, which is great. So Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, Disney Plus, all of those should be in full HD, not standard definition. So full HD and HD supported. So UFS 2.1 storage on this model. It is quite quick, you can see there, and the random reads and writes, they are also good. Sequential write a little low there, but with this chipset, it's not going to cause any sort of bottlenecking or anything like that. Here is the Antutu score. So this one getting a CPU score of close to 100,000 there, and almost 70,000 with the GPU memory there. So it's actually a little higher than I expected for this particular chipset. Being the Snapdragon 720, I was expecting to be just a fraction lower than this, probably about 20,000 points, but that is the score we have with this. And this was one of the errors that I did get with this phone in my time testing it, which now seems to be fixed anyway with the latest firmware update. So what happened is all my icons went missing, and I just had this state, and it was stuck in it, and I had to turn the phone off. But that seems to have been fixed now, which is great. So I don't really need to bother too much about that. And here we have our free available space. So you get around 111 gigabytes on the 128 gigabyte version. And remember, micro SD card support, we do have that, so you can expand upon that storage. I've tested a 128 gigabyte card in it, and it does work fine. And what about bloatware? So there are a few bloatware apps that have crept in here too with Realme UI2. And we've got TikTok, you can see, and a few others, but not a lot. I have seen other manufacturers, their competitors, that put up to about 1.5 gigabytes worth of bloat, some 22 applications. Here you're going to have around 7 or 8 bloatware apps with Realme, and I hope they just keep it toned down and they don't start adding more bloatware like other manufacturers. There are no adverts in the ROM, at least with this European version that I have. And if you're wondering about our gestures, so the gestures, they are working fine with this here. When I swipe from the sides to go back or up to go home, haven't had any issues with that because it has 180 hertz touch detection rate there, the touch sampling rate, and that is aiding in the touch performance, which does seem to be very good and very good to detect those gestures. Now onto the audio. So we have with this one just a single down-firing speaker. We had 3.5mm out, which is great. I've tested this out and it does sound excellent. It's got good, loud, clear audio, hi-fi certified too. And here is a sample now of this loudspeaker at 100%. But just before I give you that sample, call quality, I have placed some calls on this and no issues. It sounds fine. The earpiece, of course, is a normal, traditional earpiece. It's not behind the screen or anything like that. And it sounds just fine. But here now, that speaker at 100% volume. Under gaming performance now. So we have this menu that if you swipe from this side, we've got different performance options, and this is their game space. So I have it on performance mode. This is also used for rejecting calls. You've got your do not disturb gamer mode and things like that in there. And if you wanted to save on battery life, then you could set this onto something like the low power mode or balance, but I've got it onto the competition mode, they call it here, for maximum performance. So with Genshin Impact, I have it set to the high resolution and everything else on low settings, and it's running okay. The Snapdragon 720 isn't exactly the fastest out. You can see 19 frames per second here, but 30, it's actually 30. So it's normally around 30, but we do get some frame dips, and I have set it to 60 frames per second, but there's no way that it's going to be able to achieve 60 here. So I've got a boss that's level 30, that's way above my level here, and you can see now that, yeah, it's getting a little slow. A little bit of lag here. So if I lower that resolution down with the visuals, it will definitely run a little bit better. But it's just to show you that what it would be like with a demanding game. So all the titles out there, they are playable. The only thing is you just have to lower those visuals down in order to get things to be nice and smooth and fluid. Now I'm going to have a look at PUBG. We'll see how that performs, and also game for 1 hour and report on the temperatures we can expect out of the Redmi 8 Pro. So with PUBG here, the maximum settings that you can run are high and HD. Now you could set this to smooth or balanced if you wanted a slightly better frame rate, but I'm going to go with HD here and high and see how it performs. So this performance, because of the high frame rate setting, we are locked, of course, to 30 frames per second. So the phone's not even getting really that warm. The GPU's only running at 20%, and it could handle a much higher frame rate. The maximum 60, I think, would have been a lot better for this. Even with this chipset on lower settings, it would be able to do it. But yes, that's just how it is with the developers, that unfortunately we're locked to 30 here. So the performance of 30 is good, and okay, that's not anyone. I thought that was someone. It's fine. So that's the best we're going to get out of this game here. So it's all playable, and it's just disappointing, really, that we're stuck to 30 frames per second. So thermals on this phone are good. It has been 1 hour now, slightly over an hour, and we're looking at around 41 to 42 degrees maximum on the front of the phone. Okay, that's actually quite good. And then on the rear, that is a similar kind of temperatures. It's not quite 40 as you can see, well, almost 40 degrees. Now the ambient temperatures currently in this room are about 21, and even that's reporting here that the table's about 18 degrees. So yes, if you had a case on, expect a few more degrees. If you're in a hotter climate, expect a few more degrees there as well. But the thermals are very good on this phone for extended gaming, not a problem. So moving over to our cameras now, this is our front-facing camera, which sadly with video does not have any electronic image stabilization. You can see as I walk along here that there are a few tremors coming through, shakes around all over the place. The audio bitrate is 320 kilobits per second, which is good. They just really need to add that electronic image stabilization. Now let's have a look at the rear cameras. So we can shoot 4K 30 frames per second with the rear camera, and it does have electronic image stabilization, which is a surprise. I was expecting with this chipset and then the 108 megapixel sensor that we might not be able to do this because it is very demanding for the image signal processor on this one. So the bitrate of audio, it's actually very good. So 320 kilobits per second. What I have noticed though, it does sometimes drop frames, especially when you pan around in conditions like right now, sunset. Very difficult, panning around, a little bit of judder coming through, and not quite a stable, steady 30 frames per second the whole entire time. Now there's also this ultra steady mode for video, which is using some more aggressive electronic image stabilization, 1080p maximum with this feature, and it's 60 frames per second. So I'm going to run ahead now. And as you can see, it's not perfectly steady. There's some shake still coming through, but it is steadier than just using the normal 1080p video function with its electronic image stabilization. Ultra steady max mode, this now uses the ultra wide camera, so you can fit a little bit more into the shot. It looks reasonably smooth. There is some judder coming through, and I'll just jog ahead to show you that it's smooth, but I think I've seen smoother. So I'm a little puzzled and confused as to why Realme didn't set their sights a little higher for this particular release. To me, I would call this the Realme 7S Pro, because that is really what it is. This is, well, like what other manufacturers are currently doing as well, is it is really the predecessor in new clothes with the new design, the new backing plate on here, the new camera module layout, and yes, we have the spec bump for the camera. So we've got a much better main sensor, the Samsung 108 megapixel HM2, and they're marketing and focusing on that heavily. And yeah, it is a good sensor, and it's taking better photos than the Realme 7 Pro, but it's the same. And then this design choice with the slogan on the back in such huge letters that stands out and reflects with a lot of different colors there. Do you agree with this move? Let me know in the comments. Do you like having a company's slogan in huge letters? Would you like that on the back of your phone. I think it's going to be interesting to see what people think about that. And then performance. Okay, average the 720. For gamers out there, you need to lower down the visual settings to get the best absolute performance. And why didn't they go with, say, the 732? Gee, look at their competition. The competition's now using 120 Hz screens, AMOLEDs as well. They could have done this. Why didn't they go with a 90 Hz screen as well? I don't know. 50-watt charging, very fast, 40 minutes, still very, very impressive, but it's the same as before, but it's still, yeah, it's great. I'm not complaining at all about that. So it is a solid offering. It is a good phone. I'm not hating on it. It's good, but it's just they could have done so much more. That's what I'm trying to get at here. Now, I do have a little bit of an issue with my fingerprint reader on my model here. Face unlocking works fine, but the fingerprint reader, I tried to add my thumb again. It won't let me because it detects a duplicate. So I removed it. I've added my thumb about 4 different times now, and even on the latest firmware update, it still doesn't seem too good on my unit. It's taking at least sometimes 2 goes to get into the phone and unlock it with my thumb. So the accuracy is only about 70% or 60%, which is not good, and it is slow. So that's one area that needs improvement. Front-facing camera, vlog quality doesn't have any electronic image stabilization. So hopefully that's going to come with a update with a patch. But great to see 4K 30 does have electronic image stabilization. Good audio bitrate too as well, which is surpassing their competition. So they are better in some areas as their competition. It's just they're falling behind on the spec. So thank you so much for watching my review here of Realme's 8 Pro, and I will have the Realme 8 review up in the channel shortly. So do subscribe and stay tuned for that and more up and coming reviews from me.